everyone for joining. Welcome to the Washington Outsider series on terrorism and extremism. Today, we will explore the topic of Iran and al-Qaeda. Are they strange bedfellows or are they cozy fellow travelers? With us today from Egypt is Amr Farouk, who is a writer and researcher on terrorist organizations and their dynamics. Also with us is Professor Adrian Calamel, who teaches at the SUNY, State University of New York system, and is an expert on terrorism and counterterrorism. Also joining us later today is going to be Adel Alahamadi from Yemen. He is an expert on counterterrorism and will be discussing the connections between al-Qaeda and Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen. And Nabil Cherny, the translator, will provide brief summaries in Arabic after the speakers for Adel, and after Adel Alahamadi finishes his comments, he will also provide a full translation for those watching. Following everyone's comments, we will have question and answer, which I will moderate. And my name, for those of you who don't know me yet, is Irina Tsukerman. I am the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. Adrian, we will start with you. If you could tell us a little bit of a background about the Iran al-Qaeda topic, and also about the U.S. policy related to this issue. Why is so little known about Iran and al-Qaeda connection to this day? I know it's been a topic you've been researching for quite some time.
Yeah, those are a couple of good questions. And with the Iran al-Qaeda connection, why it doesn't get much coverage, it could be due to a whole number of factors. Maybe not enough attention in the government. We got a lot of information after the bin Laden raid, okay? And after the bin Laden raid, it was always suspected and always known that there was this collaboration that was taking place. But after the bin Laden raid and those files were released, now there were only 19 of them that were originally released. So I think this information was suppressed for a little while. Now, 19 files were released. One of them specifically cited Iran in the bin Laden files. Bin Laden referring to Iran, or the Islamic Republic, I'll call it that, as their core facilitation pipeline that ended up, Obama actually passed the bill, okay, about countering Iran in the Western Hemisphere based on that one document, but then none of the other documents were released. Would you like that to be translated, Irina?
Sorry, you are muted, Irina.
So yes, that would be a good time because Adel just actually entered the room. So if you could pause right now, Nabil will interpret it for him.
Sure. إذن بدأت المسهلة لهذا اللقاء السيدة إيرينا تسوكرمان بتقديم المشاركين، وهو الأستاذ أدريان كالامال، أستاذ تاريخ الشرق الأوسط والإرهاب في جامعة ستيت يونيفرسيتي في نيويورك، والسيد عادل الأحمدي محلل سياسي يمني وخبير في مكافحة الإرهاب، والسيد عمر فاروق وهو كاتب وباحث مصري حول ديناميكية الجماعات الإرهابية. السؤال المطروح الأول: لماذا لم تحظى العلاقة بين إيران والقاعدة بالاهتمام والتغطية؟ وجواب الأستاذ كالامال كان أن هذه العلاقة لم تحظى بتغطية هامة، ولكن هنالك بعد الهجوم على أو بعد قتل بن لادن كانت هنالك معلومات كثيرة أوضحت هذه العلاقة بين القاعدة وإيران، وبعض هذه الوثائق تم نشرها وجعلها على ذمة العموم. وهناك الكثير من المعلومات بعد سقوط بن لادن تبرز هذه العلاقة، وتبرز خاصة أن القاعدة كانت تتحدث عن إيران بأنها المسهل الأساسي بالنسبة لهم. وبناء على هذه العلاقة والمعلومات تم كشف بعض سبل هذه العلاقة.
So I think when it comes down to it, with part of the reason why we don't know a lot about this relationship, if you haven't done the research, is that these files were not released. What happened was there was a $10 million budget to go through the files, and they've characterized them as files that could fill a small library. Okay, there were that many files there. And what ended up happening was it was shut down. The investigation was shut down basically one day after. General Flynn, Mike Flynn, was running the investigation. I know another person on it. They were going to pour through the documents, interpret it, and then it was shut down because of sequestration. Is that enough for interpretation?
Sure, yes. لماذا لا نعرف الكثير عن هذه العلاقة؟ ربما أساسا لأنه لم تكن هنالك بحوث تخص تغطية والبحث في طبيعة هذه العلاقة. ولماذا لم يتم نشر هذه الوثائق؟ هنالك ميزانية ب10 ملايين دولار تم ضبطها للبحث في هذه الوثائق التي تم الحصول عليها، ويتم تعريف هذه الوثائق على أنها يمكن أن تمثل مكتبة صغيرة كاملة، ولكن تم إيقاف هذه الأبحاث. ولكن هنالك معلومات أن الجنرال فلين مثلا يتابع هذه المعلومات وهذه البحوث، وربما في وقت لاحق ستكون هنالك معلومات يتم وضعها على ذمة العموم بعد التثبت من محتوى هذه الوثائق.
So I think part of it was, if you look at the time frame when these files, I think it was political. This is a time when the Obama administration was already involved in backroom channels with the Islamic Republic about a nuclear program, and any type of revelation that al-Qaeda and Iran closely collaborated to the point where al-Qaeda shelters individuals, the Islamic Republic shelters al-Qaeda individuals, that would not look good. So that information was sat on. And then once the Trump administration came in, I know one think tank, Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, was constantly putting in Freedom of Information Acts. Trump administration just dumped it all and let it out there, but a lot of it has not been translated. Okay, it's been done by certain individuals at certain think tanks. So there still isn't a clear picture. And I'll end it with this. If you trace back this relationship, it all comes back to this formative relationship between the Sudan and the Islamic Republic after Bashar's coup and Turabi. So I'll kind of end it with that.
Thank you. We'll get back to you more about this in the question and answer session. But for now, we are going to go to Amr, who recently wrote an article discussing a specific individual. He's discussing a specific individual who, in al-Qaeda, who was one of the connecting links with Iran in many of these issues. And he can, Amr can tell us more about it here.
بداية يعني العلاقة بين تنظيم القاعدة والنظام الإيراني علاقة متجذرة منذ تسعينات القرن الماضي. إيران يعني عملت على توظيف واستخدام تنظيم القاعدة كأداة للضغط على خصومها في المنطقة العربية، وأيضا تصفية حساباتها مع النظام السني الموجود أو الأنظمة السنية العربية اللي موجودة داخل منطقة الشرق الأوسط، فضلا عن توسيع نفوذها داخل يعني المنطقة العربية وداخل المنطقة يعني شمال أفريقيا تحديدا. كمان هناك أيضا مجموعة من يعني الأهداف اللي يعني استطاعت أو استطاع النظام الإيراني تحقيقها من استضافة واحتواء قيادات تنظيم القاعدة على رأسهم أسامة بن لادن. طبعا هي ضمنت أن ألا يتم توجيه أي ضربة يعني مسلحة ضد النظام الإيراني أو مصالحه داخل الشرق الأوسط، خاصة أن عدد كبير جدا من قيادات تنظيم القاعدة يعني ظلت محتمية داخل الأراضي الإيرانية أو في العمق الإيراني، وأيضا كانت بالنسبة لهم ملاذ آمن ومن خلالها تم توفير يعني الأموال اللازمة للتنظيم، خاصة أن المال هو عصب أي تنظيم سري مسلح، فضلا عن إتاحة فرصة التدريب سيف العدل القائد العسكري لتنظيمه الذي الآن يعتبر البديل المناسب لقيادة التنظيم في ظل اختفاء أيمن الظواهري عن المشهد. هنجد ايضا انه اعترف في مذكرات او في بعض الاوراق الخاصه به ان ايران يعني وفرت بعض البيوت الامنه لاستضافه عناصر القاعده، فضلا عن انها يعني كانت قبله لاحتواء كل المقاتلين الوافدين من المنطقه العربيه ثم نقلهم فيما بعد الى افغانستان او الى منطقه السودان في المرحله التي كان تنظيم القاعده يحتمي بها في خلال يعني نهايه التسعينات من القرن الماضي. طبعا عدد كبير من قيادات جماعه تنظيم القاعده انتقلت الى ايران عقب يعني وضع عدد منها على قوائم الارهاب، خاصه بعد احداث 11 من سبتمبر. كل هذه الامور بتطرح امامنا او بتضع امامنا صوره متكامله عن ان النظام الايراني هو يعني بمثابه يعني المحتضن الرئيسي للجماعات الاصوليه، خاصه ان هناك علاقه وثيقه ما بين النظام الايراني وجماعه الاخوان، وهي علاقه ممتده تاريخيا، وجماعه الاخوان يعني اعلنت مرارا وتكرارا تأييدها للثوره الايرانيه، وكل قيادات تنظيم القاعده هي خرجت من الصف الاخواني او من التنظيم الاخواني، يعني كانوا قيادات في جماعه الاخوان ثم خرجوا بره الاطار او المكون الاخواني وانتقلوا الى يعني تنظيم القاعده منذ نهايه التسعينات. وطبعا هناك بعض المؤشرات التي تشير ان تنظيم القاعده في بدايه التاسيس ما هو الا فكره اخوانيه اطلقها مرشد جماعه الاخوان مصطفى مشهور كي يصبح لي يعني للجماعه روافد مسلحه في بعض بيمر بحاله من التدهور والانهيار. القضاء على عدد كبير من قيادات الصف الاول والقيادات التي يعني شكلت التنظيم في عهد أسامة بن لادن، الآن اللي هي بيتم ترجيح قيادتها للتنظيم زي ما قلنا سيف العدل الآن هو متواجد داخل الأراضي الإيرانية، ومن منذ فترة يعني في أغسطس 2020 تم اغتيال الرجل الثاني في التنظيم وهو أبو محمد المصري، وهو قائد عسكري أو كان أحد قيادات الجيش المصري ثم انشق عن المنظومة العسكرية وانضم ل يعني الجماعات الأصولية ومنها إلى تنظيم القاعدة. طبعا هناك حالة من التصفية لقيادات زي ما قلنا تنظيم القاعدة في خلال المرحلة الأخيرة، خاصة يعني تصفية بعض القيادات في اليمن وفي يعني منطقة القرن الإفريقي ومنطقة الساحل والصحراء، أو في منطقة المغرب العربي بشكل عام. كل هذه الأمور بتضع أمامنا صورة أيضا عن أن التنظيم بيمر بحالة في ظل تجفيف منابع الاستقطاب والتجنيد وعدم تمكن التنظيم من مغازلة قطاعات عريضة من الشباب العربي أو الشباب المسلم في أوروبا أو في المنطقة العربية، وسيطرة داعش على هذه الكتلة يعني على مدار ال5 سنوات مسألة استمرار العلاقة ودعم النظام الملالي ل يعني تنظيم القاعدة حتى لا ينهار التنظيم، لأن التنظيم بمثابة أداة فاعلة في إيد النظام الإيراني. أنا أعتبر أو أعتقد أن إيران ستعمل جاهدة خلال المرحلة المقبلة ألا يعني تضع تنظيم القاعدة في إطار حالة من الهبوط على المستوى التنظيمي وعلى المستوى المسلح. يعني سقوط دولة داعش وانتقال من مرحلة الدولة
Nabil?
Yes. Sorry, but there were so many interruptions at the end. So just to summarize what Ms. Amr was saying is that affirming specifically that the relationship between al-Qaeda and Iran is rooted already in the 90s of the last century, when Iran used al-Qaeda to keep some form of pressure on the countries of the region, but also to settle certain conflicts with some Sunni countries, and try also to expand the scope and the territorial influence of the Malay regime in the region, not only in the region, but also in North Africa. And there are so many other goals from hosting and supporting al-Qaeda. First of all, is that Iran would not receive any direct attacks, military or other, and that its interests in the region would always be protected. And of course, from providing specifically the funding that was necessary for al-Qaeda at a certain moment. After the disappearance of Ayman al-Zawahiri, there is now recognition almost by everyone that the next leader, Saif al-Adl, is now in Iran, which also provided some form of safety to fighters coming from the different hot or the conflict zones, in order to be later on forwarded to other places like Afghanistan and others. But certainly the main host, we know that the Iranian regime remains the main host of these radical groups. And it is this relationship with al-Qaeda has been excellent at all levels. And we know that all Iranian leaders themselves, the Iranian leaders, were at a certain time also involved with the Muslim Brotherhood leadership, and they actually come from this background. And we know that al-Qaeda was actually also a project of the Muslim Brothers who sought to have some form of armed wing for the movement. We know at the level of leadership now, after the elimination of a number of leaders in Yemen, in North Africa, but elsewhere, al-Qaeda is now being maintained in terms of structure and in terms also of armament by the Iranian regime, because it will remain in the hands of Iran in the future to ensure that specifically it is used for its ends and purposes mentioned earlier, that is exercising some form of pressure on the countries in the region and defending its interests. That is, it's using it only as some form of a shield, but also as an active hand in its own manipulations.
Thank you so much. We'll conduct with some questions afterwards, but right now, the floor to Adel Alahamadi, who will discuss the relationship between al-Qaeda and the Houthis in more detail.
السيد عادل أحمدي تدعوك المسهلة لهذا اللقاء بأن تحدثنا عن هذه العلاقة بين القاعدة، بين النظام الإيراني والقاعدة. تفضل.
تحياتي لكم، مساء الخير. هذا موضوع مهم جدا الذي أثير في هذه الليلة. طبعا الموضوع أعتقد أنه مثار بحث واهتمام شخصي من قبلي منذ العام 2009، منذ أن فجر القيادي في القاعدة، القيادي السابق في القاعدة محمد العوفي، وهو كان سعودي، انضم إلى تنظيم القاعدة في جزيرة العرب وجاء إلى اليمن، ثم بعد ذلك خرج بفضيحة كبيرة جدا لتعامل القاعدة مع الحوثيين، هذا قبل 11 سنة من الآن. هذا الجانب حينها طبعا أعددت وبحثت حول المسألة وأعددت دراسة حول العلاقة، تاريخ العلاقة ما بين إيران والقاعدة. كان مجرد طرح هذا الأمر حتى كفرضية يعتبر نوع من المبالغة أو من التهبيش وغير يعني وعدم الدقة، وذلك للتغاير المذهبي الظاهر ما بين إيران اللي هي شيعية والقاعدة التي تعتبر نفسها سنية. لكن اتضح بعد ذلك أن الإرهاب بشقيه السني والشيعي يخرج من مشكاة واحدة وهي المشكاة الإيرانية. وأنا أقول أن العلاقة لم تبدأ مثل ما ذكر زميلي المصري في التسعينات، بل بدأت منذ الثمانينات، منذ أن احتوت إيران ما يسمى بجماعة الهجرة والتكفير التي كان أيضا من أعضائها أيمن الظواهري، ومنذ أن أطلقوا أيضا شارع الإسلامبولي على قاتل السادات الإرهابي الإسلامبولي الذي قتل السادات في منصة العرض كما هو معروف. منذ ذلك الحين تعمقت العلاقة في أثناء التجاور طبعا ما بين القاعدة وما بين إيران، أثناء ما وجود القاعدة في أفغانستان. بعد الحملة العالمية على الإرهاب القاعدة في أفغانستان فر الكثير من أعضاء القاعدة واحتوتهم إيران في فنادقها، ولا يزال حتى بعضهم من بينهم بعض أبناء أسامة بن لادن رئيس التنظيم العالمي الإرهابي السابق. وبالتالي فإن العلاقة تجد أنها إلى حد كبير تجاوزت الجانب المذهبي وركزت على أن الجميع وكأنهم يحاربون ما يسمونه الشيطان الأكبر أي أمريكا والأنظمة العربية اللي يعتبرونها عميلة لهذا الشيطان الأكبر. وبالتالي فإن مستنداتهم وأدبياتهم الجهادية كلها واحدة وخارجة من مشكاة واحدة، أهدافهم بعد ذلك ستجد أنها واحدة. ثم بعد ذلك تجد كيف التقت هذه الأهداف سواء في العراق أو في اليمن. فيما يتعلق مثلا في تنظيم القاعدة واليمن والحوثي في اليمن، نجد أن الحوثي أول ما سيطر على المدن الرئيسية التي سيطر عليها يعني في العام 2014 أول خطوة قام بها وهو إطلاق مساجين إرهابيين على قضايا إرهابية محتجزين في سجون الأمن السياسي وفي سجون الأمن القومي وفي السجون الأخرى مثل السجن المركزي، وأطلق قرابة 252 محتجزا أو مسجينا على ذمة الإرهاب. وهناك تقرير رسمي يذكر بعض هؤلاء بالأسماء. ثم بعد ذلك كان هذا التنظيم أيضا ملجأ، أو كان الحوثي ومناطق الحوثي ملجأ لعناصر فرت من مناطق الشرعية أو المناطق الخاضعة للحكومة اليمنية، وعددهم 17 ومذكورين بالاسم. من بين أيضا الدلائل على ذلك بعض الذي تم القبض عليهم من قبل الجيش الوطني، وقعوا في قبضة الجيش الوطني التابع للحكومة اليمنية، وهم عناصر وقيادات معروفة داخل القاعدة، وتم مثل موسى ناصر ووقعوا في أيدي القوات الجيش الوطني، وأدلوا بشهادتهم واعترافهم وهم يحاربون مع الحوثي. هناك عمليات تكتيكية عديدة، أحيانا الحوثي ما لا يستطيع أن يقوم به داخل المناطق الشرعية يوكل القاعدة. كان الناس يظنون أن القاعدة ربما عبارة عن جماعة جهادية سنية سوف تكون احترابها مع الحوثي كبيرا، ولكن الحادث أنها كانت متماهية مع المشروع الإيراني، سواء بمسماها الذي هي القاعدة أو فيما يتعلق الآن بالتفريخ الجديد المسمى بداعش. عمل الحوثيون طبعا منذ سيطروا على مناطق معينة في شمال غرب اليمن على تسهيل دخول بعض العناصر الإرهابية الأجنبية كذلك، وليس فقط العناصر الإرهابية التي كانت محسوبة على أو ذات الجنسية اليمنية، بل استقبلوا العديد من القيادات الإرهابية من خارج اليمن وفي مناطقهم، وهذا أيضا مذكور في التقرير الذي سوف أقوم بإرسال نسخة باللغة الإنجليزية لكم جميعا بعد أن أنهي كلامي. كما عملت أيضا هذه الميليشيا وسلطاتها الغير شرعية، عملت على إصدار هويات جديدة وبطائق جديدة لعناصر في القاعدة حتى يتحركوا بكل سلاسة ويسر داخل وخارج اليمن. نجد كذلك هناك رابط حتى عائلي بين قادة القاعدة وقادة الحوثي، وكأنهم يعني يعتبرون أنفسهم جميعا من آل البيت، بما فيهم مثلا أبو بكر البغدادي الذي هو رئيس داعش. هذا أمر أيضا في غاية الأهمية. لهذا نجد أن الإرهاب نحن نعرف أن الإرهاب لا دين له ولا مذهب ولا ملة، لا الإسلام ولا المسيحية ولا أي دين يقره ولا الشيعة، ويفترض أيضا ألا ننسبه لمذهب معين. وبالتالي فإن مشروع الإرهاب الموجود في الوطن العربي الذي تم تغذيته منذ العام 1979 كنوع من تصدير الثورة الإيرانية التي أعلن عنها الخميني، ومن يومها ولا يزال إلى الآن يتصاعد، بحيث أن القاعدة وأسلوب مزايدتها مثلت أيضا فلنقول كانت ديركتر الإرهاب الشيعي، أي أن الإرهاب السني أفسح الطريق، لأن العالم كله انتفض ضد ما يسمى بالإرهاب السني، إرهاب القاعدة وما إلى ذلك. أفسح هذا المجال. لماذا؟ هذه أيضا نقطة من نقاط التخادم بين الجانبين، أن هذا الجانب أدى إلى إسكات أي منابر محسوبة على السنة حتى وإن لم تكن إرهابية، وأدى ذلك إلى أنه الوحيد الذي الآن يتحدث عن الأمة ويتحدث عن القدس ويتحدث كذا هم، ويحاولون يستقطبون بهذا الخطاب قطاعات من الشباب العربي والشباب الإسلامي، هم يعني القاعدة تقوم بهذه الخدمة بشكل متواصل. الأمر الذي نجد بعده أنه يعني مثلا فيما يتعلق هناك معسكرات معروفة جدا للقاعدة داخل مناطق من ميليشيا الحوثي، مثلا في محافظة البيضاء، وتبعد كيلومترات بسيطة عن أيضا تمركز الحوثيين، ولا يقع بينهم أي نوع من أنواع الاشتباكات أو الحرب. هم عبارة عن يعني عن مشروع واحد إرهابي واحد يصب من مشكاة واحدة، يريد الإساءة يعني أو بالأصح يقوم بنشر الإرهاب داخل وخارج اليمن، ويعمل على تبرير بعضه بعضا، حيث أن الحوثيين مثلا يريدون أن يقدموا أنفسهم أيضا، يريدون أن يقدموا أنفسهم لدوائر غربية وكأنهم يحاربون القاعدة. وهذه إحدى الكذبات التي يفترض ألا تنطلي على المجتمع الدولي من الأنف صاعدا، إذ أن الإرهاب أولا لا يحارب الإرهاب بإرهاب، لا يمكن للإرهاب أن يحارب إرهاب، والجميع يقوم بنفس العمليات الإرهابية والتمثيل بالجثث. ويعني رأينا كيف تصلب القاعدة بعض الأطباء الذين تتهمهم أنهم يعالجون يعني عسكر حكوميين، وكذلك يفعل الحوثي. كل ما يمكن تخيله الآن الحوثية ربما حتى نوع من التماهي الفكري والأخلاقي حتى مع القاعدة، تقوم بدعشنة الحياة داخل العاصمة صنعاء وبعض المناطق التي تسيطر عليها، من منع الأغاني ومنع وإيجاد مواصفات معينة في اللباس وما إلى ذلك. هذا الأمر لم يعمله إلا تنظيم القاعدة، سواء في فترات سيطرته على بعض المدن اليمنية أو أيام ما كان في تورا بورا وأفغانستان. إذا نحن أمام مشروع يجب أن نعمل على إزالة الفوارق الوهمية بين شقيه الإرهابيين، إذ الإرهاب لبعضه شريك ولبعضه متعاون، وخصوصا وهو يرفع نفس الشعارات، وهناك من الشواهد ما يؤكد أنهم لم يكونوا في يوم من الأيام على درجة عداء، إلا إن كان هناك فصائل يعني ربما من النوع الذي لم يصل إليها التعميم التنظيمي التي يجعلها تفهم هذه العلاقة. فقد نجد مثلا من بين أعضاء القاعدة من يحاول أن ينكر ذلك لأنه لا يعرف. دخلت على بعض المواقع التي كانت طبعا موجودة في الإنترنت قبل سنوات ثم الآن تم حظرها. كان هناك جدال كبير جدا حول علاقة أيمن الظواهري شخصيا بإيران وتنظيم والإرهاب الإيراني. البعض طبعا يتفاجأ، والآن تحدث لمثل هؤلاء حتى نوع من التصفيات. من يجدونه أنه ليس موافقا على هذه العلاقة من الجانبين، يتم بعد ذلك بطريقة أو بأخرى الزيد به في عملية الإرهابية والتخلص منه. هذا الموضوع مهم جدا، أشكركم على طرحه، وهنا طرحت هذا الأمر باختصار شديد جدا، وأشكركم كثيرا.
Thank you. Mr. Adel Alahamadi says that thank you. First of all, he thanks you for raising this very important hot issue today, because it also represents one of his personal projects on which he has been working since 2009. Mentioning that, for example, Mohammed al-Houthi, who joined al-Qaeda in the peninsula, left after a big scandal when he was actually cooperating, when he found that he was cooperating with the Houthis. This Mohammed Houthi was one active leader of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. So normally when people talk about an issue like this, people often denounce this hypothesis as ungrounded because it represents what is unlikely to happen specifically here, knowing that Iran is Shia and al-Qaeda is Sunni, and but then how could they be actually be together and share the same objectives? But he says that actually, with the great due respect to Mr. Farouk, he says that this relationship did not actually start in the 90s, but according to his own research, it started in the 80s with the first movement of al-Hijra wa Takfir movement. And it marked the start specifically of exporting the Iranian Revolution, which led actually also to an important development of a relationship between al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and many other leaders who tried also to strengthen this relationship between the Sunnis and the Shias in this project, which was led by Iran at a certain moment, which they called fighting the big devil, that is the USA. The objectives have been the same for both Houthis and Iran. We take, for example, when Houthis, after they conquered cities, the first thing they did is that they released terrorism prisoners. About 252 inmates were released, and there's an official report with all their names. The Houthis also hosted some of those who deserted the official Yemeni army, about 17 of them, including Musa Hassan, who was actually held captive by the Yemeni army at a later stage, and he confessed that he joined the Houthis and that he was actually also in a relationship with these groups. The Houthis have used al-Qaeda as proxy sometimes for certain of their operations in Yemen. And this, of course, relationship became much more stronger than it had been in the past, with a spin-off in what is known as Daesh, and which led also to the establishment of a group of these terrorists in northwestern Yemen, which welcomed foreign fighters that were, of course, whose arrival to Yemen was facilitated by al-Qaeda. And a report, he will provide a report in English about already this movement that took place in northwestern Yemen. Another practice is that the Houthis issued new IDs to a large number of them so that they could move freely in Yemen. But we have to start from the major hypothesis here is that terrorism has no religion, whether it is Islam or Christianity or whatsoever. So actually what is happening now is that both the Shia and the Sunni radical groups have been used by the system to develop some form of ideology, which is based on the Iranian revolution, which they tried to export. And it shows also that an important work has been done by both al-Qaeda and Houthis, and they have always concealed any form of disputes or conflicts among themselves. A very good example about that is that in one of the regions in Yemen, in Bayda, there is a both camps, that is a Houthi camp and an al-Qaeda camp, are just miles away, and they have never been into any form of conflict. On the opposite, there seems to be a relationship. So this seemingly unlikely relationship is reflected actually in their common practices and their common objectives. The Houthis, when they first conquered the cities, they outlawed music and imposed a certain apparel, but they also did the same practices that the al-Qaeda was doing elsewhere, including, for example, the torturing, but also killing of doctors who treated official army soldiers. And except for small groups, which seem to be autonomous groups, they are not under the global structure of al-Qaeda. These small groups have been acting independently from others. They seem to have been acting independently, and he has been trying to consult and track down their exchanges and information on the web. And the sites actually show that al-Zawahiri had a very important relationship with Iran. Again, he finds that this is a very important issue, and his work will be, of course, this is a very, very brief overview, and his work actually will provide much more details about these facts. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the speakers for these insightful remarks. I want to engage on this issue in more depth now by turning to speakers with some more specific questions and answers. And Adrian actually wanted to elaborate on the last point that was made by Adel Alahamadi, and also I wanted to ask to follow up on a question about the Sudan-Iran relationship, an aspect that is poorly understood in the West. I've actually heard US diplomats to this day claiming that Muslim Brotherhood regimes could not possibly be cooperating with Iran. That is not true. We know that Morsi's regime in Egypt had close cooperation with Iran. They were discussing development of joint intelligence operations. We know that high-level Islamist Muslim Brotherhood members in the Morsi administration who were engaged in international fundraising for that branch in Egypt were also in direct discussions with Iran. And they were high-level visits. There was a lot of joint discussions going on. We don't know what would have happened, but we do know that the history of Muslim Brotherhood influence in Iran actually goes back to the Islamic Revolution, if not earlier, because some of the Muslim Brotherhood texts had actually been translated by Khomeini and became quite popular in the revolutionary circles in Iran. So that relationship, without going as far as al-Qaeda, actually precedes even the direct terrorist links. But, so in that case, Sudan's Bashir regime, it's not altogether shocking that they did have a relationship with Iran, but what are the facts behind it? Turning to with that to Adrian, and actually maybe if Nabil could translate briefly my comments.
Sure. So if you look at the influence of Bashar, especially Turabi, he's the one that really served as a catalyst for bringing what you would call the Afghan Arabs from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, individuals that had fought against the Soviets. He recognized at the time that the Shia had created, through Tehran, and Mr. Alahamadi brings up some great points, is that, you know, this has been going on for a long time. They've left people in places to make sure that they can breed insurrection, recruit followers, etc. So it's not just unique to the Middle East. This has taken place in Latin America. This has taken place in Europe, and it has been since the early 1980s. All right. With Turabi coming to power, what he did was he was able to he saw that the Sunni strike force was not, it was disjointed. It was not the coherent, effective strategy that you see coming from the IRGC, Quds Force, and their proxy Hezbollah. Okay, so what they wanted to do was create something that was a Sunni type version of this. And what happened was a series of shuttle diplomacies going back and forth between Tehran and Khartoum, back and forth, and to the point where Rafsanjani, senior director, the head of MOIS, the head of the IRGC, Vahidi, they're all in the Sudan. And then you have shuttle diplomacy going the other way, where Zawahiri, and it's brokered by Turabi, he meets with the upper establishment, Ayatollah Janati, in Tehran to try and forge this relationship. All right, so this is something that has been worked on for quite some time. So 92 to 96 are really those critical years that I look at, where you have training camps set up all over the Sudan, well over 30, okay, and they're run by the IRGC, they're run by the Quds Force, they're run by Hezbollah. And who you have there attending is Egyptian Islamic Jihad. You have, okay, Sunni group, number one. And this goes back to this whole Sunni versus Shia narrative. It has completely blinded the West that these two groups would cooperate. And this is a narrative that I continue to hear, okay? So you have that, you have the PFLP-GC with Ahmed Jibril's group, you have Imad Munir, Hezbollah, okay? You have the head of Hamas coming down to this conference. And what they start to do is they start to create this terrorist international where their relationships get closer and closer and closer. Tehran builds up, the Islamic Republic builds up their influence in the Sudan using monetary aid, helping the Sudan, spreading influence that way. And also he's meeting Turabi's needs, and Turabi sees this. And by the time you get to 1996, there is an important meeting that takes place that really kind of coalesces around this Hezbollah International. It's the merging of Iranian trained Sunni terrorists combined with the Iranian terror apparatus. And out of that, they came out of two main decisions. One, to unify their finances, all right? And this is really bizarre because this puts bin Laden over in South America at one point. And bin Laden's in the tri-border area, 1,800 miles away from, it's a Hezbollah stronghold, to figure out how to launder money, illicit funds, things that way, okay? Then you look at 1990, those years. The other thing that they want to do is all training is going to be standardized, all right? And when the training, they have the training in Sudan, and then people with promise are flown up to Mashhad in Iran. They're flown to the Bekaa Valley to be trained by Quds Force, to be trained in Lebanon by Hezbollah. Okay, and then you look at the consequences, and you see, this is where al-Qaeda, and I say al-Qaeda and Hezbollah start to test the waters as far as their operations and their collaboration goes. You have Black Hawk Down, the incident in Somalia in 1993, and there's all sorts of evidence where there was Iranian command and control helping out, and there was a flood coming in from the Sudan into Somalia. All right, you have the World Trade Center one in 1993. Al-Qaeda, Ramzi Youssef, what is he using? He's using an ammonium nitrate bomb, the favorite bomb, the crude bomb of Hezbollah that they perfected over time. All right. Then you look at Khobar Towers in 1996. All right. That is a joint Hezbollah al-Qaeda operation blamed on Saudi Hezbollah. Okay. Joint operation. And then you have the Khobar in Tanzania bombings, okay, in 1998, on August 7th, 1998. And that's another joint operation that takes place. And I should mention that this is no coincidence that Abu Muhammad al-Masri, the al-Qaeda senior leader, and his daughter, who was killed in Iran, and if you're not aware of this, his daughter was married to Hamza bin Laden. He was killed on August 7th. And we know it was by the Mossad under US orders, and it was revenge for that incident. So there's been a long collaboration that's been going on, and you can kind of see it coming into fruition. And then you can see it on the battlefield where they don't have problems with a lot. Now, Syria caused problems. It absolutely did. It strained the relationship with Hamas, which is a Sunni group, Muslim Brotherhood, all right? But you can see that that relationship is right on track because they just fired 4,500 missiles into Israel based on Tehran's orders. I hope that answers some of the questions here and fills in some of the blanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much for these comments. I'll let Nabil translate them.
شكرا. تدخل السيد أدريان كلامل ليجيب على هذا السؤال الذي طرحته إيرينا منذ البداية، هي هذه العلاقة وكيف وصل هذا التاريخ وتاريخ هذا التأثير، تأثير الإخوان المسلمين في إيران، ثم العودة لتأثير إيران في المجال العام للتدخل الإخوان المسلمين والجماعات المسلحة. يقول الأستاذ كلامل أن تأثير الترابي بالعرب إلى أفغانستان، وهناك ومن خلال هذه العمليات تم وضع أفراد في مواقع معينة وفي أماكن معينة لانتداب والقيام بتمويل وحشد كل ما هو ضروري. كانوا في أوروبا وفي أمريكا اللاتينية منذ الثمانينات، ومع وصول الترابي للحكم رأى أن القوة السنية لم تكن الاستراتيجية المثالية نظرا لتشتتها، وحاول وضع بناء مثال، ولكن هذا المثال بني على علاقة منذ البداية بين السودان وإيران، وحيث كانت هنالك دبلوماسية نشيطة جدا كان فيها الظواهر أيضا من الفاعلين الذي التقى مرات في إيران بالسودانيين وبالإيرانيين لمناقشة هذا المسار. ويقول أن سنة 1996 كانت سنة مفصلية في وضع مخيمات التدريب التي شاركت فيها كل الجماعات من حزب الله إلى الجهاد الإسلامي المصري وغير ذلك. ولكن العودة دائما لهذا الفرق بين السنة والشيعة لا يبرز فعلا ما حدث بين الفصيلين أو بين المذهبين. يعطي مثال إلى مثلا ما حدث لجماعة أحمد جبريل وحزب الله وحماس، والتي سعت مع بعضها البعض إلى خلق ما يعرف بالإرهاب الدولي. والتأثير كان بطبيعة الحال من إيران ومن التراب في نفس الوقت. وبرز مع التدريب هذا، مع هذا التدريب، تدريب إيراني ممول، ويعكس مثلا أيضا كل ما قام به بن لادن من نشاط قبل ذلك، بما في ذلك زيارته لأمريكا اللاتينية لكي يتعلم طرق تبييض الأموال التي ستساعد على تمويل المشروع أو البرنامج، وأيضا كيف مروا إلى مرحلة أخرى حيث أصبح فيها كل التدريب معياري أدى إلى تنقل كل المتدربين إلى إيران وإلى حزب الله لمتابعة نفس التدريب. وهذا ما نجده خاصة في كل البرامج أو العمليات المشتركة التي قاموا بها، منها عملية الصومال في 1993، وعمليات والقنبلة التي استعملها رمز يوسف في عملية 1996، ثم أيضا الهجوم على خبار في 1996، وفي تنزانيا في 18 من أوت 1998، والتي كلها كانت عمليات مشتركة تبرز هذا التدريب المشترك بين المجموعتين. مثال آخر هو أبو محمد المصري، وهو من كبار قادة القاعدة، وابنته والتي كانت زوجة حمزة بن لادن، واللذان قتلا من قبل الموساد بإذن من الولايات المتحدة. كلهم كانوا في علاقة بإيران، بعلاقة مباشرة بإيران. في سوريا الإشكال في العلاقة مع حيث ربما تغير، ولكن نرى دائما أن تدخل إيران معكم من موجود أثرا ويبرهن عليه عدد الصواريخ التي فاتت 400 صاروخ التي تم إطلاقها على إسرائيل بإذن وبأمر من إيران. شكرا.
Thank you so much. Now, turning back to Amr, he recently wrote an article about Saif al-Adel, an al-Qaeda operative who has tried to revitalize al-Qaeda in light of some of the people who were killed, including Masri, whom Adrian mentioned. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the findings of your article and the relative situation of al-Qaeda today?
السؤال موجه إلى السيدة عادل الأحمدي. تحدثتم عن مسألة القاعدة وعلاقتها بالإخوان المسلمين، وأيضا دور المصري في هذه العلاقة. هل يمكن أن تعطينا بعض التفاصيل أكثر عما وصلت إليه في بحثك في هذه العلاقة بين إيران وبين المجموعات الإرهابية الأخرى التي تتبع القاعدة؟ شكرا. I'm sorry, Irene, it looks like Mr. Al-Ahmadi has been disconnected.
Oh, no. The question was for Amr, actually.
Sorry, for Amr. Okay. Because Mr. Ahmadi. السؤال موجه إلى السيد عمرو. السيد عمرو، هل تسمعنا؟
He's muted. He needs to unmute himself.
الرجاء استعمال الميكروفون. الميكروفون مغلق.
حضرتك ممكن تقول السؤال تاني طيب؟
السؤال هو فيما يتعلق بالعلاقة بين القاعدة وإيران. تحدثتم عن هذه القاعدة وأصلها أيضا، هل يمكن أن تحدثنا أكثر عما وصلت إليه في بحثك أنت في هذه العلاقة بعض التفاصيل الأخرى؟
طيب، بداية يعني أنا كان لي تعليق على مداخلة الدكتور عادل الأحمدي. يعني هو ذكر أن أيمن الظواهري كان عضوا في جماعة التكفير والهجرة، وهذا الكلام غير دقيق من الأساس. هو كان عضوا في تنظيم الجهاد المصري، ويعني هذا التنظيم كان هو أحد المكونات اللي قام عليها تنظيم القاعدة فيما بعد نتيجة التحالف اللي تم ما بين الطرفين بعد التزامات. ثانيا يعني احتواء تنظيم القاعدة لعدد من قيادات الجهاد المصري لم يكن إلا بعد عام 89، يعني بعد تأسيس تنظيم الجهاد عفوا بعد تأسيس تنظيم القاعدة. لكن أتفق معه تماما أن العلاقة بين النظام الإيراني وبين تنظيم القاعدة هي علاقة فكرية ممتدة، إذ أن تنظيم القاعدة في الأساس ما هو إلا نتاج أفكار سيد قطب وأبو الأعلى المودودي والبدايات الأولى لتأسيس أو المنهجية الفكرية لجماعة الإخوان في المقام الأول. يعني العلاقة الفكرية ما بين النظام الإيراني وبين الجماعات الأصولية هي علاقة ممتدة تاريخيا منذ ما قبل يعني الثورة الإيرانية، خاصة أن يعني الخميني قام بترجمة عدد من كتب سيد قطب وأقرها على بعض المؤسسات التعليمية فيما بعد الثورة الإيرانية عام 79. وهذه الأفكار هي أحد المكونات الأساسية اللي من خلالها تم تأصيل ما يعرف ب يعني دولة الخلافة والمشروع الصفوي، خاصة أن هناك حالة من التقارب ما بين الطرفين فيما يخص قيام أو مشروع قيام دولة الخلافة. لكن يعني هناك أيضا علاقة فكرية وعلاقة تنظيمية ممتدة ما بين جماعة الإخوان وبين النظام الإيراني منذ فترة طويلة، خاصة أن هناك يعني نوع من الالتقاء ما بين حسن البنا وبين آية الله موسمي أو آية الله الخميني في أربعينات القرن الماضي، ونتج عن هذه التقاربات تأسيس ما يعرف ب يعني الجمعيات أو جمعيات التقارب السني الشيعي، ومن خلالها تم تأسيس عدد من الجمعيات في المنطقة العربية وفي دول الخليج. يعني العلاقة، يعني أنا من وجهة نظري أن العلاقة ما بين النظام الإيراني وبين الجماعات الأصولية هي علاقة فكرية ممتدة ولها تاريخ طويل، وهناك الكثير من الأدلة على توثيق هذه العلاقة من خلال طبعا الإطار الفكري أو الإطار حتى التنظيمي، لأن يعني حسن البنا أو جماعة الإخوان في حد ذاتها المكون الأساسي لها هو يعتبر شبيه بما تقوم به الدولة أو النظام الإيراني في طهران من خلال اختيار العناصر واصطفائها وتكوين ميليشيات مسلحة زي ما إيران قامت بتكوين الحرس الثوري الإيراني. هذه العلاقة تجلت ما بعد ثورات الربيع العربي وصعود جماعة الإخوان للحكم سواء في مصر أو في المنطقة العربية. يعني كنموذج يعني العلاقة ما بين الطرفين داخل الدولة المصرية بعد 2012 هناك اتفاقات على تأسيس ما يعرف بالحرس الثوري الإخواني ومساعي تفكيك الأجهزة الأمنية المصرية واستبدالها بكيانات تدين بالولاء للجماعة وللمرشد. كل هذه الأمور هي كانت يعني عن طريق تفاهمات ويعني مساحة مشتركة ما بين النظام الإيراني وبين جماعة الإخوان. أيضا هنجد أن قاسم سليماني كان هو بمثابة عنصر الاتصال الرسمي ما بين تنظيم القاعدة وما بين النظام الإيراني، وأيضا ما بين جماعة الإخوان وبين النظام الإيراني. حالة التشابك الفكري والتشابك التنظيمي بتجعل أمامنا أن يعني فعليا إيران كانت بترغب في توظيف مكونات الإسلام السياسي لصالحها، السيطرة والهيمنة على دول المنطقة العربية وعلى منطقة الشرق الأوسط وصناعة لوبيهات داخلها يعني تدين بالولاء للمشروع الصفوي في المقام الأول. كل هذه الأمور يعني هي ترجمت بشكل حقيقي على مدار التاريخ المعاصر، خاصة في ظل والدور الذي تقوم به إيران في دعم جماعة الإخوان في معركتها ضد النظام المصري الحالي، واستيعابها مؤخرا لعدد من يعني قيادات الجماعة وإيران الآن هي أعتقد أنها ستكون الملاذ الآمن بدلا من قطر وتركيا في ظل التفاهمات السياسية والتقارب الذي يتم الآن على أرض الواقع ما بين الدولة المصرية وما بين النظام التركي والنظام القطري. شكرا.
Thank you. Mr. Amr's answer is that he would like, first of all, to start with a comment on the information provided by Mr. Adel Alahamadi, and he says that Ayman al-Zawahiri, in fact, was not part of the Takfir and Hijra group, but initially he was part of the al-Jihad al-Masri group.
طب ايه اللي انت بتعمله ده؟ حد قال لك امسح العربيه؟ يعني انا بتكلم مع ناس من بره مصر، انت عملت الحوار، تخلي في الحوار. انت حمار.
So sorry, so I said he was not part of, but he was part of, Ayman al-Zawahiri was a member of al-Jihad al-Masri and not Takfir wal-Hijra. But then he actually joined after 1989, not earlier. But he says, I certainly agree and highly support that the relationship between al-Qaeda and Iran is a very strong one. And it is ideologically explained, specifically in the reliance of the Iranian Safavi regime, specifically on the thought of people like Sayyid Qutb and al-Mawdudi, Abu Ala al-Mawdudi. So there is evidently a very important and strong ideological relationship that is historically grounded. And Ayatollah imposed these books after they translated them into Persian to be taught in their schools. Two is also in their defense of the Caliphate project, which has been supported by the Iranian regime at a certain time and for which it tried to play the leader. So certainly they meet on certain grounds. We know that Ayatollah and people like Brahimi, they in the 1940s, they founded an associations for Sunni Shiite dialogue, and they tried to set up broader objectives that go beyond the Sunni and the Shiite differences. And these have been also reflected in the large number of organizations that developed in different parts of the Muslim world. Iran and radical groups have an outstanding history, and this history is also very well documented. We see that, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood had a similar view to what the Iranian regime has done since 1979 by dismantling an official national army and developing more loyal and very reliable groups that are very loyal not only to the regime but to the ideology of the regime, like the National Guard, the Revolutionary Guard, sorry. Evident also in the Muslim Brotherhood rise in Egypt and their attempt also to duplicate the Iranian system by trying to dismantle the core structural forces and replace them by similar groups that are loyal ideologically. So this was part of the project. We know that for Iran, we know that Qasem Soleiman was the contacts, the focal point for contact between al-Qaeda and Iran, but also between Muslim brothers and Iran. Iran wanted to use political Islam and tried to develop lobbies and tried to develop some form of loyal followers that would support the Safawi project that it was developing. And this is reflected specifically in Iran's attitude towards Egypt after the end of Muslim Brothers' rule in Egypt. But now things have been taking a different trend now with the relationships between Egypt and Qatar, and Egypt and Turkey now being more active. Iran now is responding, and we'll see how Iran is responding in different ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was a very, very helpful insight. And I'll actually be following up on some of these comments in a bit. Now, back to Adrian with a very light-hearted and not at all controversial question, which is, of course, the question of 9/11 terrorist attacks. We have heard that what has become public knowledge is that Iran has provided some level of assistance and cover for al-Qaeda members. It sheltered the al-Qaeda members during a certain period of time before and after these attacks. But what is the extent of that assistance? How close was that relationship? I've been hearing rumors that, not rumors, but actually eyewitness accounts from former Saudi intelligence officers who've testified that Islamist institutions, or rather Muslim institutions that have been taken over or influenced by Islamists, such as Islamic Development Bank, had actually funded Iran's nuclear research. They themselves maintained contact with al-Qaeda leaders such as Osama bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And so we see that there was definitely a degree of some sort of logistical cooperation and not merely shelter and financing and funding before 9/11 and probably sometime after. Can you elaborate what more is known about that situation?
As far as the 9/11 report goes, you look through it and there's very little mention in it. There's talk about safe travel, safe transit. There's possibly issues with passports, false documents, what have you. There wasn't a whole lot revealed in that. The public knowledge, I still don't think we know the extent to which the Islamic Republic was aiding and abetting, you say, in the 9/11 tragedy. I would say that it didn't cost a lot of money. It was a low operation. It was a low cost operation when you look at the impact that it had. So as far as financial assistance, I can't see al-Qaeda needing financial assistance for that. As far as the plan, that was an al-Qaeda plan that was, started off in the Philippines with Operation Bojinka, Ramzi Youssef, and then it was morphed into this Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's plot. I doubt this, maybe, I have to believe that Iran was, or the Islamic Republic was aware that this was going to happen. I think I'd be naive not to believe that. I just can't speak to how much assistance that they got regarding this, the attack. And then the other question you had about, it was about Islamists and something about nuclear activity.
Yes, my understanding is that actually some of the Islamist institutions or actors within institutions actually actively donated towards Iran's nuclear research.
It can't be traced. I mean, they set up false NGOs. They set up all these false groups in the West as well, in the region, in the Middle East, and the money that comes in there. The economy of a regular economy, and there's an economy that's completely run by the IRGC. And whatever money comes in, it usually goes to the IRGC. And yes, the Islamic Republic says that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard is has no intentions, or their military, it's all their nuclear program is all for peaceful purposes. But why is the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Council running it, running that program? Why was the doctor scientist who was assassinated, why was he a high-level ranking member of the IRGC?
You're cutting out.
So,
sorry, you froze up. If you could repeat the last.
Oh yeah, is it better now? Is it better
Yes.
now?
Mm-hmm.
When did I break up? Precisely.
A few sentences ago.
Yeah, we have no way of tracking the money. I think it would be naive to think that money that is coming from different institutions that are set up as charities aren't making it into some type of military dimension that is being run by the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Council. So the answer is, yeah, I wouldn't doubt if some of the money was funneled in the nuclear program, because that is their objective. They want to have that nuclear weapon for, this is my opinion and my view, for blackmail, nuclear blackmail or destruction of Israel. And we can see them blackmailing the IAEA right now with inspections and whatnot. So I hope that answers your question, Irina.
Thank you so much. And I'll let Nabil translate, but I think the other speakers may have disappeared, but I'll just let him translate anyway.
اوكي جوابا على السؤال المتعلق، سؤالين في الواقع. السؤال الاول بعلاقه ايران باحداث 11 من سبتمبر، والسؤال الثاني حول الانشطه النوويه والتي يتم تمويلها من مصادر من مؤسسات اسلاميه. بالنسبه للسؤال الاول، اجابه الاستاذ كلامل يقول ان هذه المسائل تتعلق بوثائق سفر مزيفة، ولكن لا يمكن أن نحدد مستوى دعم إيران لهذه العملية وأن نجزم بذلك. العملية لم تكن مكلفة ولم تحتاج القاعدة في ذلك الوقت لتمويل كبير، وكانت القاعدة هي التي أشرفت على التخطيط والتنفيذ. ولكن ندرك جيدا أن هذا بدأ في الفلبين مع رمزي يوسف وعملية الفلبين، ولكن ما يمكن أن نتأكد منه، وطبعا لا يمكن أن يفوت أي شخص ذلك، أن إيران كانت تعلم جيدا بهذا المخطط وبالعملية. فيما يتعلق بالأنشطة النووية، هنالك مؤسسات إسلامية مولت، يقول أنه ربما لا يمكن أن نتأكد إن كانت هذه الأموال فعلا ذهبت إلى النشاط البحث النووي، ولكن هذا أكيد لأن البحث النووي كان بالنسبة لإيران من أولى الأولويات، ومن البديهي أن يتم رصد الأموال لذلك. ولكن دفاعا عن هذا المشروع، تقول إيران أن المشروع النووي الإيراني هو السلمي والاستعمال السلمي، ولكن عندما قتل أحد أهم المشرفين على البحوث تبين أنه من أعلى قادة الحرس الثوري. إذا نعرف جيدا أن المشرف على المشروع الإيراني هو الحرس الثوري، وليس من هم من جانب من مؤسسات أخرى. المال يأتي من مؤسسات مختلفة، هذا أكيد، ولكن ما تسعى إيران إليه هو استعمال هذا السلاح للابتزاز، وهو ما تقوم به إلى حد الآن، من ذلك ابتزاز الوكالة الدولية للطاقة الذرية. شكرا. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Amr has appeared to have lost connection, but in this case, I'm going to redirect a question to you. He touched on the fact of Qasem Soleimani being an essential connecting link between al-Qaeda and Iran. When Soleimani met his end last year by U.S. Military strike, many analysts have commented that Iran lost an essential asset. They lost a major figure who was quite necessary to the operations in Iraq. He lost a lot of the hold. Iran lost a lot of the hold over various terrorist groups and militias that Qasem Soleimani was connecting to. In your assessment, do you think Soleimani's demise was did irreparable damage to the Al-Qaeda Iran connection, or do you see that it was just a temporary kind of a temporary obstacle, and that there are other figures now being helping revitalize this connection? And so, who are they, and how are they able to fill Soleimani's shoes?
Well, the individual that took over, Ismail Khani, he's known for his previous job was recruiting Afghans, Shia Afghans to fight in the different militias. One of Qasem Soleimani's legacies that's going to be very, very difficult to unwind. And this is the way the Islamic Republic works. If you go back to 1982, with the creation of Hezbollah, but they've also worked through multiple proxy groups. And these proxy groups have been well established in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Yemen with the Houthis. They have been well established. So yes, it was, the Qasem Soleimani strike was a setback. It obviously was. It was a major punch to the nose, and the killing of Mohandas as well, because he was the coordinator in Iraq of all the different militias. But at the same sense, I think what was hurting the Islamic Republic more than anything is they're cut off from the financial flow to fund these militias. To fund the militias in Iraq, the Hashd, they were protesting because they weren't getting their payments from the government. So the Qasem Soleimani strike was, it was, I personally, I've been calling for it for 2 years. The guy was roaming around the Middle East and Syria, Iraq, taking photo ops while he was basically creating a genocide in Syria. When it happened, I said, this is a good start, but it's just a start. It's not the solutions to an end. Tehran reeled back. It was like getting punched in the nose for them. But I think if they start to find that they're getting sanctions relief, one other narrative that you should be aware of in the West is that there's been talk and people have been saying that the Iraqi militias have been splintering because of whatever reason. They're not getting money or whatever it may be, when in fact what they're doing is they're just changing names to confuse the people who are trying to target them, arrest them, or whatever it may be. So the concept that the Iraqi militias, and look at the Houthis, I mean, they are just rampaging across Yemen. Hezbollah, firm control in Lebanon, and the Iraqi militias, they've started to become more and more active with some targeted assassinations of some high-profile individuals, as well as killing of innocent protesters as well.
Yeah, I'll let Nabil translate in case somebody's people are listening and need the translation in Arabic.
Sure.
شكرا. بالنسبة لي هذا السؤال الذي يخص موت قاسم سليماني وما يعنيه هذا بالنسبة للنظام. أقول أن إيران فقدت الكثير فعلا، وفقدت الكثير ممن كانوا يعملون لديها، ولكن هذه الخسارة هل أضرت بالعلاقة التي كانت بين إيران وهذه المجموعات؟ وهل أن البديل لقاسم سليماني من هو؟ وهل سيكون هنالك فقط، هل انتهى الأمر أم هل هي فقط فترة انتقال؟ الواضح أن الخليفة من خلف قاسم سليماني هو من كان يشرف على انتداب السنة الأفغان، وهو أيضا مع من كانوا يعملون على وضع فصائل مختلفة تعمل بالنيابة للنظام الإيراني في لبنان وفي مواطن أخرى. وموت سليماني بطبيعة الحال كان ضربة موجعة، وفي نفس الوقت ما أضر بإيران هو شح الموارد لتمويل هذه المجموعات. مع شح الموارد ونرينا أن الموظفين كانوا يتظاهرون لتأخر سداد جراياتهم، وهذه الشح بطبيعة الحال أدى إلى تراجع تمويل هذه المجموعات منذ مدة. وأيضا بالنسبة لسليمان يقول الأستاذ كالامال أن منذ سنوات كان نبه إلى خطورة ما يقوم به هذا الشخص الذي كان ينتقل بكل حرية، تنقل بكل حرية في الشرق الأوسط ويزور مجموعات مختلفة، وكان يحضر لإبادة جماعية في سوريا. ونراه اليوم مثلا أنه في العراق الميليشيات أصبحت تنقسم فيما بينها وتسمي نفسها أسامي مختلفة، أسماء مختلفة، وهذا بالنسبة للبعض أنه يعكس شح الموارد ونقص الموارد للتمويل التي كانت تصل لهذه المجموعات. ولكن هنالك أيضا هدف آخر هو بث الفوضى، ونرى هذا ما تقوم به إيران مثلا من خلال الحوثيين الذين نراهم يخربون اليمن، وما يقوم به حزب الله في لبنان وأيضا في وخاصة ما تقوم به المجموعات من استهداف وقتل بعض عناصر محددة. شكرا. Thank you.
Thank you so much. While I'm waiting, I think Amr is trying to return. But Adrian, I know you mentioned you're planning to write a book about the Iran al-Qaeda connection. What direction do you think it's going to go? How are you planning to access the documents? And why, in your opinion, the non-profit organizations that have been able to obtain some of these files are not doing anything of value with them at the moment?
That is the big thing, is that there needs to be a poring over these documents and a translation of all these documents. There's a lot of black boxes that you can't see into with this relationship between Iran, Hezbollah, al-Qaeda. You have to also remember that Iran, or the Islamic Republic, is not the most transparent country. Okay, so when you hear reports coming out of there, such as, well, there was this dispute between al-Qaeda and the Islamic Republic and the individuals in there, you never really know what to believe and what's truth, what's propaganda, and usually there's a little bit of sprinkled truth in those in their statements. I'm sorry, what was the rest of your question? I'm sorry.
I was asking you, why do you think that these organizations that have received some of these documents, why aren't they translating them? Why aren't they doing anything of value with them? And what, if anything, can be done about that? Just today, we had an event with 3 speakers from the US, Egypt, and Yemen. Clearly, there's an international interest in exploring this topic, and there's no shortage of language, or people with a background in the language and linguistic nuances and so forth. So what's preventing these projects from moving forward? Is it funding? Is it ideology? Is it concern about the Biden administration?
If anything, I would have hoped, and I would have thought that the Trump administration would have gone through the documents and spent the money to reveal these connections, to go through them. What people have to remember is that when they grabbed all the documents from bin Laden's compound in Abbottabad, they just took everything and they threw it into a bag. So what you'll have are all these different hard drives and thumb drives of images of kids playing cats, whatever it may be. And then all of a sudden, an important document just shows up, and that's 1 out of like 1,000. Okay, so it takes a great amount of time to actually go through these. Now, the problem is no one has, the government has not put in the funding to translate them. When the funding was there, it got stripped by Susan Rice, and the blame was sequestration, budget cuts, stuff like that. Now I can say that under the Biden administration, they're not going to translate this stuff. It would work against their interests, I believe, their current interests with the JCPOA and what they consider and what they call a realignment of the Middle East and seeing Iran as a fulcrum, which is a dangerous proposition. What I can tell you is there is one organization that I know is putting in a tremendous amount of work on this, and one particular individual, 2 individuals. It's the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, all right? And the individuals are Tom Jocelyn, that's Joscelyn, and Bill Roggio, Roggio, and they have a team working on this. They were all over the Obama administration to get the files released. They kept on getting the old sources and methods. We can't release them because it reveals the sources and methods. Well, the sources have been Latin. Okay, so you're not revealing any sources in there. So there was just maybe a sliver of documents that they needed to hold back. And now that raid was in 2011, now we've had 10 years pass. And no one's really done a thorough deep dive into these. So from a selfish perspective, I'm waiting for Tom Jocelyn, and I hope that he gets something out on this soon. I know that I listened to a podcast that he has, and I know that he's planning on publishing a book around the Bin Laden documents. But yeah, I mean, that is a great need. Doesn't have the funding, and FDD is doing it on its own. Tom's doing it on his own with a small team to help him translate.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I was actually in touch with him very briefly recently, and now that you've mentioned that, this may be an opportunity to highlight his efforts and to bring him in a future event with others for continuing to do this work. I am planning another event in this series on Iran and its connection to terrorist groups, because there is a lot, and I'm seeing different disparate researchers from various countries who are engaged in their own independent projects, but there is no coherent coordination of efforts, which is a shame. It's a global situation. It's not just American or Saudi or Yemeni or Egyptian. It's everybody who's everybody should be working together. It should be a joint sharing of information and the sharing of documents and assistance to and I think I'm going to try to make something like that happen through hosting people who are working on this in these events. And
Tom would be the perfect guy. And just to give you why this is so important is Hamza bin Laden was the heir apparent. He was being groomed as the next leader of al-Qaeda.
mm-hmm.
And the only picture we had of him was a very adolescent picture. So we had no idea what he looked like. And then all of a sudden these files were released, picture of Hamza bin Laden, more of age. Now the US has a better idea who he is, and he's eventually taken out, all right? And that's not releasing that file, just a picture of him, who is the most wanted person. That's dangerous. And I see that as being politicizing intelligence. It's dangerous. And I think, as I said, Tom, he's done a lot of work on this, and he can elaborate on what he's uncovered so far. But yeah, it should be a collaborative effort with, countries working together on this thing.
No, the dimension that you just underscored is quite disturbing, because we are seeing the US government engaging in what amounts to a cover-up of a terrorist organization and terrorist governments who've attacked US targets. Both Iran and al-Qaeda are responsible for American deaths. Al-Qaeda is responsible for massive attack on US soil, among other things. These are, for the past, 20 years, we've been hearing Al-Qaeda, the worst terrorists in history. They did this, that, and the other thing. And what are we doing about it? We are not doing everything possible to understand and bring to light and hold these parties responsible. We are playing political games with we're not discussing Iran's role. We are not discussing the role of other Islamist funders who contributed to these to such operations being a success. It couldn't have happened without a significant amount of coordination. Just as U.S. shares intelligence with various countries, so do terrorists and their funders. Yeah. So the fact
and bias comes in with what you decide to release, and what they decided to release, it painted a picture of, it had no context around it. They just released little snippets. So the perception from 2011 until 2016 that there were, until people started to dig into the documents, was that once the full documents were released, that bin Laden was, the term was used, a lion in winter, that he had completely retired from the business, that he was, just sitting about in that about campaign, just minding his business. When you see that, no, he's working the network, he's coordinating with everybody, he is a micromanager. And that kind of, it also fell into the narrative, oh, we killed bin Laden. And in the bin Laden documents, it'll show that al-Qaeda has grown as an organization. Compared to where they were in 2001, they have more followers, they control more territory, they're more dangerous. Since 2011, we haven't seen an attack on the US homeland because they were given a stand down order by Amin al-Zawahiri. He said, don't attack on the West, let's gain ground in the Middle East, let's gain foothold here and continue to expand our territory towards this caliphate idea. All right. So Zawahiri doing that with the holding back of this intelligence shows that what they want to show, that al-Qaeda was on the road to defeat. That's what we kept on hearing over and over and over. But when they weren't on the road, they weren't decimated, they weren't on the road to defeat. In fact, they were stronger. And then when you have the Arab Spring or Arab volcano, or whatever you want to call it, they grew more and took more territory. So
in fact, everything that we've been told about the terrorist dynamics has been basically false. We've been told a completely different. We've been told that the Arab Spring uprisings were democratic, whereas in fact they were funded and organized by specific Islamist organizations and some of their counterparts. That's the opposite of a grassroots spontaneous movement. That's an organized, funded structure from top-down approach. We've been told that al-Qaeda is small, weak, splintered, and so forth, where in fact we see that it's grown stronger. And the reason why they're not as visible in that sense is because they're doing something else. As a recent essay on counterterrorism I shared had written, when terrorists aren't terrorizing, they're busy recruiting, strategizing, and planning. They're not necessarily done or weakened. And we are seeing that even in Iraq, the so-called, we are playing whack-a-mole with terrorist militias, but in reality, financially, they're able to get around sanctions by renaming, rebranding, re-emerging, and shuffling around their apparatus and their staff members. So essentially, everything we thought we knew about terrorism has been wrong. Isn't that a good, isn't that accurate?
Yes, it's completely accurate. And I have an expression, and I think I always say all roads lead back to Tehran on this. I mean, before 1979, can you name a single suicide bomber that blew up a building, that took hundreds of lives? No. Martyrdom was pushed as being acceptable by Ayatollah Khomeini. He pushed that concept, all right? He was he perverted the religion and perverted the ideals of it. And the other thing that he did was he preached a very, this is one thing that gets me, and it goes to that Sunni Shia divide, is he preached a very inclusive message to pull in that Sunni crowd. All right. So when he, let's say, if you look at the Paris bombing campaigns, there was a Hezbollah cell there. That was a Tunisian that ended up converting over to Shiism, a Sunni converting to Shiism and taking out the axe. So it was a very inclusive message. And I hate to call Khomeini a genius, but that's one of the geniuses of what he did. As far as the Arab Spring goes, you look at the Arab Spring, and yes, you have the Ikhwan, you have all these different groups that were involved. The Libya, I mean, that was, you know, poorly thought out European intervention with that. But again, it's a W you know versus W you don't know. You have a bunch of terrorists running around, such as al-qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb or Ansar al-Sharia, and then you have Gaddafi. So what's the lesser of evils there? Syria, we saw that as soon as that turned into an uprising, that became Iran versus the Sunni jihadists. The guns came in right away. That was not peaceful at all. That was immediately going to turn into a bloodbath. And I saw that because Syria fits into Iran's tactical design to create a land bridge so that they can ship munitions, illicit goods, whatever it is, to Hezbollah over in Lebanon. So yeah, that's the and a lot of people will point back to 2009 as being kind of like the beginning in the Green Revolution in Iran, as being the start of the Arab Spring. And I would say that was based on, you know, protesting against a flawed democracy, a flawed election system. I'm sorry, democracy slipped out of my mouth. A flawed election system that's just a selection by one individual. People took to the streets. Ahmadinejad was named president, even though everybody thought he should have been another individual. And you look, and they ended up murdering a bunch of people in the streets. So that seemed to be the kind of momentum that was taking place. But it seems like when the peaceful protests, and they are suppressed, and they're suppressed brutally, and then anybody that rises up that has nefarious objectives, goals, such as ISIS, such as al-Qaeda, they want to take territory, control it. And that's one thing al-Qaeda has been very effective at with the Arab Spring, is branding themselves as not an ISIS. We're here to help you. We're not going to impose Sharia on you. We're not going to do these things. But as soon as ISIS is gone, then they start imposing these things on the civilizations.
Thank you so much. Before we part, I'll let Nabil just summarize this discussion briefly for anyone in the Arab world who's listening to this, and then I think we will conclude the event.
Yes, a couple of things I want to make clear to everybody, especially in the West, is that you need to throw out the whole Shia versus Sunni narrative. Yes, they will fight at times, but that is something that came out of academia, and it's stuck there, and it's stuck in the U.S. State Department, and you need to forget about it, because they clearly collaborate with each other. And then the collaboration, it starts as early as 1991, 1990, possibly 89. But that shows that that's a relationship that has built up over 31 years, all right? And the other guests explained very well that you have parts in Yemen where al-Qaeda, AQAP, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, isn't fighting with the Houthis. They're kind of living side by side because they both thrive on the chaos. Question is, when they've killed everybody else, do they turn the guns on each other? Don't know about that. There has been this close collaboration. It's not just been technical training on bombs, but it's been operational. It's been theological as well. There's been training. Sudan plays a critical part in this. The former Sudan, not the one that has just recently thrown away this oppressive tyranny that was there. Sudan is where everything kind of coalesced in the 1990s, where you have Hezbollah, IRGC, and all the different Sunni groups, Egyptian Islamic Jihad, the PFLP-GC, they're all coming down there, and they're being trained by al-Qaeda. by Hezbollah and by Quds Force operatives to form an effective strike force. And then finally, you can see their actions, especially with Khobar Towers joint operation, and then the 2 bombings in Kenya and Tanzania. Those were both joint operations where Hezbollah, the IRGC, was helping al-Qaeda kind of pull those off. And it kind of fits in with similar bomb blasts that you've seen pulled off by Hezbollah, such as the Marine barracks bombings, dual bombings separated minutes apart. That's a trademark. And then, of course, finally, I'll wrap it up with this. We know that they've been harboring al-Qaeda operatives in the country. All right. And some of the messaging that we got out of there is that there's been some strains, some were put under house arrest, but the message isn't transparent coming out of there. I think it's just kind of a game that they're playing to say that we're not that close with them, but the evidence is there. It's hard to dispute it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'll let Nabil kind of summarize some of these highlights in the discussion, and then we'll break until next time.
Great. Thank you, Irina.
Nabil?
Yes, إذا تلخيصا لما قدمه الأستاذ منذ قليل حول هذه العلاقة بين إيران والقاعدة، يمكن تلخيصها أساسا تاريخيا في أنها بدأت ربما في سنوات 91 من القرن الماضي، 90 وربما 89 لأقصى تقدير، ولكنها ظاهرة أساسا فيما كل العمل الذي تم على مستوى التدريب وعلى مستوى التنسيق الذي حصل منذ تلك الفترة، خاصة في السودان التي احتوت ونظمت التدريب بمشاركة الحرس الثوري وبعض التنظيمات الأخرى مثل حزب الله وغيرها، وترجمت في عدد من العمليات التي نراها أساسا في الصومال وفي 96 وفي سنوات أخرى مثل 96 وفي خبار وفي تنزانيا، وكلها عمليات مشتركة وتحمل إمضاءين واضحين للتوجه الإيراني والسني أيضا. إذن بالنسبة لكل ما تقدم هنا، هو الخلاصة أساسا هو أن هذه العلاقة التي بني عليها الفهم العام لعمل القاعدة وإيران كما يقول الأستاذ كلامل، والتي هي مبنية على التفرقة والاختلاف وأيضا العداء في بعض الأحيان بين الشيعة والسنة، هي خاطئة، وكل المؤشرات تبرهن أن كان هنالك تلاقي أساسي وعمل وتقارب، وأن إيران كانت تستقبل قادة القاعدة. في بعض الأحيان كان هنالك معلومات أنهم تحت الإقامة الجبرية، ولكن نعرف أن كل هذه كانت فقط أكاذيب، وأن إيران نسقت وعملت مع القاعدة، ونرى ذلك في عدد كبير من هذه التوجهات، وحان الوقت لكي نراها. بالنسبة للبحوث حول باستعمال الوثائق التي تم الحصول عليها، المسألة هي أن هذه الوثائق كثيرة جدا وتمثل الآلاف من الوثائق، أغلبها صور وفي بعض الأحيان بعض الوثائق خاصة، يعني بين آلاف الوثائق ربما هنالك وثيقة واحدة ربما لديها أهمية، ولكن بعد أن تم وضع هذه الوثائق على ذمة عدد من المنظمات والباحثين، فيمكن أن ننتظر خاصة العمل الذي ستقوم به بعض هذه المنظمات من فرديا أو أيضا جماعيا من خلال عمل مثل عمل Foundation for Defense of Democracy، مؤسسة الدفاع عن الديمقراطية من خلال توم جوسلين وبيلوراسيو، والذي ينوي نشر كتاب حول الوثائق الخاصة ببن لادن. في انتظار هذا الكتاب نتأكد دائما أن هنالك علاقة وثيقة بين الطرفين، وهو ما لم تبن عليه المقاربات الأكاديمية والسياسية والتحليلية. شكرا لكم جميعا.
Thank you so much, Nabil. Thank you so much, Adrian, and to the other guests who unfortunately couldn't stay the whole time. This topic, we're just scratching the surface. Thanks to the three guests today, we started seeing beyond the narratives that have been perpetuated by the U.S. government, by the media, by the academia, and by people who have an interest in perpetuating the status quo, unfortunately. Covering up terrorism in order to claim that that without covering up for Iran's terrorist activities, we can't get a deal that will stop Iran from doing nuclear is absurd. We are seeing that the U.S. government and other countries are ignoring information by IAEA concerning Iran's continuous nuclear activity. We are seeing that reports from intelligence agencies from Sweden, Netherlands, and Germany have all affirmed that Iran has continued cheating and essentially engaging in nuclear enrichment and nuclear research the entire time, and has not stopped pursuing the nuclear weapons even despite JCPOA and all efforts by everyone who has tried so hard to appease it. Now we are seeing the Biden administration lift terrorism sanctions, first on Houthis and then also on various Iranian bodies themselves. So what we're seeing is actually active encouragement of terrorism by governments who claim to be fighting it. It seems to me that counterterrorism field has turned into a joke, a game, a source of funding for many groups and individuals, and the perpetuation of expertise, quote unquote expertise, by people who are all too happy to engage in a continuous chase after their own tail. In order to really get to the bottom of what terrorists are doing and how to combat them, we need to start bringing together the people who are not burying the story but uncovering it, and that's what the Washington Outsider is hoping to do in this series on terrorism and extremism, exploring Iran's links to various terrorist organizations. This was the first event in the series. Stay tuned for others to follow. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Irina. Thank you, Nabil.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.